Welcome to Declassified Deep Dive, where unredacted files reveal hidden truths. Let's uncover the secrets. I'm your host, Raj, and each week we explore a new secret deep dive.
Okay, get ready, because today we're going deep, really deep into the Pentagon Papers.
Ooh, this is a big one.
Government secrecy, whistleblowing on a massive scale, and really a turning point for how the public viewed the Vietnam War.
You know, what I find so fascinating about this deep dive is all the different sources we have to work with. Like, we're talking actual video interviews with Daniel Ellsberg, the guy who leaked the papers.
Yeah.
And there are excerpts from a documentary that, bring the story to life.
Right.
Even court documents from all the legal battles that happened afterward. Plus, we get to see how the public and the media reacted at the time. It's like a time capsule.
It's pretty incredible, right? But this isn't just some dry history lesson.
No.
This is a story about power, about the lengths that people will go to expose the truth, and how those revelations can completely shake up a nation.
Exactly. I mean, the Pentagon Papers themselves, we're talking about a huge top-secret study here.
Yeah.
7,000 pages, 47 volumes. This thing was massive. It was commissioned by Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense at the time,
Wow.
to document, the United States' involvement in Vietnam all the way from 1945 to 1967.
So it sounds like a pretty straightforward internal history project at first glance.
Right, exactly.
But is that where it gets interesting?
That's exactly where it gets interesting. Because what this study revealed was a bombshell. It showed that presidential administrations, from Truman to Johnson, well, they hadn't exactly been straight with the American people about the war. And it wasn't just like, oh, we miscalculated this or that.
Yeah.
The study suggests that there was a deliberate pattern of misleading the public about the war's goals, about the likelihood of actually winning.
That's a pretty serious accusation. Are there specific examples from the study that back that up?
Absolutely. Take the Johnson administration, for instance. The Pentagon Papers showed that they were secretly escalating the war, even while publicly promising restraint. It's one thing to say one thing and do another, but when you're talking about war, that kind of disconnect can really erode public trust.
Absolutely.
It did.
So we have this massive study exposes these huge secrets, but it's still top secret at this point, right?
Right.
So how does it actually get out to the public? Enter Daniel Ellsberg.
Right. Ellsberg is a fascinating guy, a former Marine, a Defense Department analyst. He actually worked on the Pentagon Papers himself.
Oh, wow.
But over time, he becomes disillusioned with the war, especially after seeing it firsthand in Vietnam.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, it's one thing to work on a report, but to see the reality on the ground,
Absolutely.
that has to change a person.
It does. And so, through his work on the study and then his experiences in Vietnam, he comes to believe that the American people have a right to know the truth, no matter what.
So he decides to leak the study to the press. That must have taken incredible courage, knowing the potential consequences.
Oh, absolutely. He was risking his career, his freedom, potentially even his life.
Yeah.
And the documentary really captures the emotional turmoil that he went through. He even contemplated some pretty radical ways to get the word out, like dropping the papers from a helicopter.
Oh, wow.
He was that determined to bring the truth to light.
He was committed, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But obviously leaking classified information, I mean, there are consequences, right?
Of course. Ellsberg was hit with espionage charges. He was facing a possible life sentence. The weight of that must have been immense. But clearly, he felt that the public's right to know was worth the personal risk.
Yeah, it wasn't just the legal battle, right? I mean, the public scrutiny, the accusations of betrayal, it must have been incredibly isolating.
Absolutely. But his actions set off a chain reaction that would forever change the relationship between the government and the American people.
So Ellsberg leaks the Pentagon Papers, and it causes this huge controversy. What happens next?
Well, things escalate pretty quickly. The Nixon administration, they were not happy.
Oh.
They saw the leak as a direct attack on their authority,
Yeah.
like a threat to national security.
Yeah, you have to remember, this is the height of the Cold War, and the Vietnam War was so divisive.
Right.
So the stakes must have felt incredibly high.
Oh, absolutely. The government actually went to court to try and stop the New York Times and the Washington Post from publishing the papers.
Oh.
It became this landmark Supreme Court case, New York Times Canadian United States, a real First Amendment showdown.
Okay, so for those of us who aren't legal scholars, what exactly is prior restraint?
That's a good question. Basically, prior restraint is when the government tries to prevent something from being published, before it's actually released. It's a really big deal because it directly challenges the idea of a free press.
Got it. So the government's trying to stop the newspapers from publishing the Pentagon Papers. But how did the courts rule?
Well, in a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court sided with the newspapers.
What?
It was a huge victory for freedom of the press. The court basically said the government can't just silence the press because they don't like what they're saying, even in matters of national security.
That's a powerful statement. But the dissenting judges, I mean, they must have had some serious concerns about the potential harm from publishing classified information, right?
Oh, of course they did. Their opinions reflected this worry about the potential for leaks to damage things like diplomatic relations or undermine national security operations.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that this debate isn't, black and white.
Yeah.
There are valid arguments on both sides. But ultimately, the majority ruled that, in this specific case, the public's right to know outweighed the government's desire for secrecy.
This whole case seems like it happened so fast.
It did.
From publication to the Supreme Court, wasn't it just a matter of weeks?
Yeah, you're right. It moved incredibly quickly.
Yeah.
Which just underscores how important the situation was.
Yeah.
These were really significant issues at stake.
Absolutely. So the Supreme Court rules in favor of the newspapers. The Pentagon Papers are published. How did the public react to all of these revelations?
Well, the Pentagon Papers had a massive impact on public opinion. And it wasn't just that it confirmed what some people already suspected about the war. It was the sense of betrayal,
Right. It wasn't just about disagreeing with the policies anymore.
Exactly.
It was about feeling like they had been lied to by their own government.
Yeah, you can really see this reflected in the source material. There's this one quote from a citizen at the time that says, "I used to believe what the president said about the war, but now I don't know what to think. They haven't been honest with us." It really eroded the public's trust in the government.
It's interesting to see how the Pentagon Papers affected not just the people who were directly involved, but really shifted the entire national conversation. What about internationally? Did other countries take notice of what was happening?
Well, this was the Cold War, remember? The U.S. was trying to, be a global leader.
Yeah.
And the Pentagon Papers, they revealed some pretty embarrassing details, you can say, about American foreign policy and military strategy. So it's hard to say for sure what other countries thought, but
it's easy to imagine that America's rivals might have seen this as a sign of weakness.
Right, or internal division.
Yeah.
It definitely complicated this narrative of American exceptionalism that the U.S. was projecting at the time.
Yeah.
It raises questions about whether these revelations maybe even emboldened America's adversaries, or if our allies started to question whether they could really rely on us as a partner.
It's amazing to think about how one leak could have such far-reaching consequences.
I know, it really is.
It wasn't just about the Vietnam War. It affected the public's trust in the government, it emboldened the press, and it might have even shifted the balance of power globally.
Definitely. And speaking of the press, how do you think the media landscape changed after the Pentagon Papers?
Well, it seems like it really emboldened journalists to challenge official narratives and really go after investigative reporting. They saw that it was actually possible to hold the powerful accountable.
You're right. It shifted the whole relationship between the press and the government. It created a more, you could say, adversarial dynamic.
Yeah.
Journalists were less likely to just accept what the government told them at face value.
You could argue that the Pentagon Papers almost led to the Watergate scandal a few years later.
Yeah, it's definitely part of that same lineage.
Yeah.
It helped create this climate where journalists were more willing to, dig deep and challenge authority, even when the stakes were really, really high.
Let's talk about Daniel Ellsberg for a second. He's often hailed as this hero, this whistleblower who risked everything to expose the truth. But I'm curious about his journey. He wasn't always a critic of the war, right?
No, you're right. That's a great point. It's important to understand that Ellsberg's story, it's more complicated than just like a simple hero narrative.
Yeah.
He actually supported the U.S. involvement in Vietnam initially.
Oh, wow.
He even worked for the government. He helped shape their Vietnam strategy.
That's quite a turnaround. What caused him to change his mind so dramatically?
Well, his views evolved over time. His experiences in Vietnam, working alongside soldiers, seeing the devastating impact of the war firsthand, that started to chip away at his support for the conflict.
So it was the reality on the ground that started to change his thinking.
Exactly. And then when he worked on the Pentagon Papers, he saw this mountain of classified information, and it suggested this pattern of government deception and manipulation. It wasn't just about, making mistakes. It seemed like there was a deliberate effort to mislead the public.
That sounds like a real moral crisis for him.
It was. He really went through some deep soul searching. He knew that leaking the papers could have huge consequences for him. including prison time. But ultimately, he felt like he had this moral obligation to bring the truth to light.
It's interesting how he weighed the potential risks and benefits. It wasn't like he was acting impulsively, you know?
Oh, absolutely. He was very methodical in his approach. He consulted with legal experts. He thought through all the possible ramifications. In the end, he decided that the public's right to know, it was more important than his own personal safety and security.
And his actions, I mean, they inspired other whistleblowers to come forward,
Hmm.
to challenge secrecy within the government.
Absolutely. And his story is still relevant today. It sparks these important debates about the role of whistleblowers, the importance of government transparency, and, that idea of individual responsibility to speak truth to power.
Ellsberg's story is a really powerful reminder that even people in positions of authority can have a change of heart, and that sometimes it takes someone with inside knowledge to expose wrongdoing and really create meaningful change.
Now, let's talk about the process of actually getting the Pentagon Papers published. It was like something out of a spy movie. These journalists were under incredible pressure.
Yeah.
They were holding this incredibly sensitive information that could, topple the government.
Yeah.
And potentially change the course of history.
Wow. They must have felt that weight of responsibility.
Oh, definitely. The decision to publish the Pentagon Papers was a huge gamble. They consulted with legal experts. They weighed the risks to national security. They thought about the ethics of revealing classified information. I mean, there were no easy answers.
No easy answer.
No, but in the end, they believed that the public had a right to know what was in those papers. That the information was too important to keep hidden.
It's crazy to think about the logistical challenges.
Oh, I know.
I mean, we're talking about thousands of pages of documents.
Thousands. They had to verify the information, protect their sources, and then find a way to publish it all without the government finding out. It was a huge undertaking. And they did it all while knowing that the government was actively trying to stop them.
It's like they were working against the clock.
Absolutely. The pressure must have been immense. And remember, this was way before the internet.
Right.
Before digital publishing. So they had to physically print and distribute the papers. It was a logistical feat.
Wow. That's commitment. That's a belief in the freedom of the press.
And the government's reaction, of course, was immediate and furious.
Yeah.
They tried to block any further publication, claiming it would irreparably damage national security. It turned into this huge legal battle that went all the way to the Supreme Court.
And as we talked about earlier, the Supreme Court ultimately sided with the newspapers, really affirming the importance of a free press.
It was a landmark victory for journalists and for the public's right to know. I mean, the Pentagon Papers case solidified this idea that the government can't just silence the press because they don't like what's being reported.
It's amazing how the Pentagon Papers case, it didn't just stay in the courtroom. It really sparked this national conversation about government secrecy, about the Vietnam War, about the balance between national security and the public's right to know. And it's amazing how those themes are still relevant today.
I know, right? The Pentagon Papers are kind of this touchstone for all these modern debates about whistleblowing, about government surveillance, about the role of the media in a democracy. We're still wrestling with these questions today.
It shows that the fight for transparency and accountability, it never really ends.
Never ends. It's fascinating how the Pentagon Papers case, it's still relevant. It's a touchstone for these debates about whistleblowing, government surveillance, the role of the media in a democracy. We're still dealing with these questions.
Yeah, it shows that the fight for transparency and accountability is never over.
Never over. Now, we've talked a lot about the impact in the U.S., but we can't forget about the global implications. I mean, this was the Cold War. The U.S. was locked in this struggle for global influence with the Soviet Union. And the revelations in the Pentagon Papers, they could really undermine America's standing in the world.
Yeah, how do you think other countries saw these revelations? Did they think that the U.S. was suddenly vulnerable, unreliable?
Right. Did it embolden America's adversaries? Those are good questions. I mean, historians are still debating all of this. It's hard to say for sure what impact the Pentagon Papers had on international relations. But, one thing's for sure, the case had implications far beyond America's borders.
It's like this reminder that even events that seem domestic can have global consequences.
Absolutely, especially when you're talking about a superpower like the U.S. And it's also worth thinking about the long-term implications of the Pentagon Papers case on the relationship between the government and the media. Before the Pentagon Papers, the government had way more control over information.
Right.
But this case, It really emboldened journalists to challenge those official narratives, to really dig deep into government secrets.
It created this more adversarial relationship between the press and the government, which we're still seeing play out today.
Absolutely. The Pentagon Papers, they set a precedent for investigative journalism. It showed that journalists have a responsibility to hold those in power accountable, even when it's difficult or dangerous.
And the case had a huge impact on legal precedent, right? Like how courts view prior restraint and the First Amendment. It set a very high bar for the government to try to suppress information in the name of national security.
Exactly. It really solidified this idea that freedom of the press is absolutely essential to a functioning democracy.
And it also highlighted the importance of whistleblowers, right? Like people who are willing to hold those in power accountable. It showed that individuals with inside knowledge can play a crucial role in exposing wrongdoing and bringing the truth to light.
Absolutely. But, it's important to remember that whistleblowing is often risky, and it can be a very lonely road. Ellsberg, he faced serious charges, and he could have spent the rest of his life in prison.
Yeah.
His story reminds us that speaking truth to power, it often comes at a cost. But it also reminds us that sometimes the cost of staying silent is even greater.
So what does all this mean? The Pentagon Papers case is a reminder that democracy, it's messy. And often it's contentious. It's this constant back and forth between the people who want to hold power and the people who want to hold them accountable.
And it reminds us that the truth, well, it's often hard to find. And that those in power don't always have our best interests in mind.
But it also reminds us that we, the people, we have the power to demand transparency, accountability, and a government that serves our needs, not just its own.
The Pentagon Papers case is a powerful example of how one act of courage can set off this chain reaction that leads to lasting change. It's a story that continues to inspire us and challenge us as we try to navigate this complex world.
It's amazing just thinking about how this one event, the leak of the Pentagon Papers, could cause such huge ripples across so many different parts of society.
Oh, right.
Like the legal system, the media, public opinion, even international relations.
Yeah, it really shows you how everything is connected,
Yeah.
And it brings up a really important question that we're still grappling with today. What's the right balance between national security and the public's right to know?
That's a tough one. I mean, on the one hand, you have the government saying that some information just has to be kept secret.
Right.
To protect national security and ongoing operations.
And on the other hand, you have, people who believe in transparency.
Right.
They say the public has a right to know what their government is doing,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to things like war and peace.
Yeah, I can see both sides. But the Pentagon Papers case, it definitely seemed to kind of tip the scales toward more transparency.
It did, at least in that specific case.
Yeah.
It set a really high bar for the government to try and suppress information.
And it emboldened the media to really act as a watchdog.
Yes.
Holding the government accountable, questioning the official narrative.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it also started a conversation about, what are the responsibilities that come with that freedom? The journalists who published the Pentagon Papers, they didn't make that decision lightly. They talked to legal experts, they weighed the risks, and ultimately decided that the public had a right to know, even if there were potential consequences.
It's a good reminder that freedom of the press isn't absolute.
It's not.
It means using that freedom responsibly and ethically.
Absolutely. And recognizing that even in a democracy, there's always going to be this tension between the government wanting to keep things secret and the public's right to know.
Yeah. Thinking about Daniel Ellsberg's role in all of this, it's clear that whistleblowing can be a really tricky thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it can expose wrongdoing and lead to positive change.
Right.
But it can also come at a huge personal cost.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Ellsberg faced some really serious charges, and he could have ended up spending the rest of his life in prison. His story is a reminder that whistleblowers, often they face retaliation, isolation, their reputations are damaged.
It's true. So while we might celebrate these people, the ones who come forward with the truth, it's important to remember the sacrifices they make.
And to put systems in place that protect them and encourage them to speak up without being afraid of what might happen.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Pentagon Papers, what are some of the key takeaways you think our listeners should keep in mind?
Well, I think the Pentagon Papers case reminds us that even in a democracy, power can be abused, and that secrecy can be used to hide things that shouldn't be hidden. It also shows how important a free press is in holding the powerful accountable and making sure the public knows what's going on. And it underscores the importance of individuals, people like Ellsberg, who are willing to speak truth to power, even when it's risky.
It's a story that feels very relevant today, as we deal with issues like government transparency, national security, the role of whistleblowers in holding institutions accountable.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that the fight for a more just world, a more transparent world, it's an ongoing fight, and it needs everyone to participate.
So to our